Hello everybody. Venerzap here, and I'm hopping in with a quick video that I wanted to get in here. So recently, a big point of discussion and contention has been about all of this like AI stuff that's been coming out, especially in terms of like art or like other creative things, writing essays. I'm not talking about all of that right now. I'm just saying like that stuff would come up, but it did bring me up the idea of what about other creative avenues, especially the creative avenue of game design and designing a game? I love game design. I love looking at gaming elements, and I'm looking to expand a lot more of that here on my channel in terms of looking at design, looking at different games, trying to get things about that. But a small interlude into that I wanted to do, especially while it's so topical, is about this AI thing and see, could AI come up with a card game, come up with a board game, come up with something like that? So here I have OpenAI's Chat GPT, so you guys know where it's coming from. And I started up with a conversation about it of like, can you come up with some rules for a card game in general? And really interestingly, what it has outlined out here in terms of its first response are a lot of things about its general guidelines for creating rules for a card game, determining a goal, deciding a number of players and equipment, setting up, establishing an order of play, defining actions, establish rules for winning and losing, and then any other additional rule constraints. And we will see it do these exact 7 things as I try to ask it other prompts further down. I've already asked these prompts, which is why I'm bringing it up into a video, so I can more of like discuss about it. But it's really interesting that it has all this sort of like outline already. Like this seems to make a lot of sense in terms of how to outline it. And then using like a specific AI prompt, we could ask it to fill in all the different bubbles here and try to come up with a design. So that's what I did. I said, come up with a custom card game idea. Then what it came up with was for this card game called Escape the Island. And what's really interesting here is that this is supposedly a game that could be played with just the 52 card playing deck, which I think is really cool. So I'm just going to kind of scroll through reading out what it is so that you guys can follow along with it. It outlines first the objective, being the first player to collect all the necessary supplies to escape the island. Number of players, 2 to 4. That's a very classic number for a card game. For equipment, you need a deck of playing cards with the face cards, the jack, queens, and kings being removed from it. So anything from ace through 10. And then a set of the supply cards. And these are like some additional element that's throwing in there. So it's like, we're going to come up with these custom resource cards, which will be food, water, a map, a raft, and a compass. So in the setup, you're going to shuffle the deck and deal 7 cards to each player, 7 cards starting hand size. It's pretty nice. And you're going to place your supply deck face down. Players are going to take turn going clockwise around the table in the order of play, as it said as one of its starting 7 things. Actions on your turn, you can draw a card from the deck, play a card from your hand to the table, or use a special ability of a card in your hand. That is also very classic. These are very archetypal things of card games that a lot of card games have borrowed, especially if you guys reference my other video about like sort of like the phases. Like it's doing a lot of archetypal things here. For the card types, there are going to be 2, your resource cards and then your action cards, which also makes a lot of sense. Resource cards being what you're going to be needing to win. There are 4 types of resource cards here: food, water, and map, and a raft. Notably, this conflicts with what it said earlier about there being a compass. So already in terms of its own like design, it's starting to conflict with itself a little bit, and that's important to point out. With the action cards, you can do special actions. Wow. So you can steal a resource, you can trade a resource, or discard a resource. And with these resources being part of the main way to win the game, in terms of you needing the 4 of these to win the game, it makes sense that interacting with these resources is the main way you would want your action cards to work. So that makes a lot of sense and is also very coherent. Winning and losing the game, you win by getting the 4 things. If someone else wins before you, then you lose because they won before you. And then it decides that if the deck runs out and no player has everything, the game ends in a draw. So it's just going to be a no-win game. Then it tacks on these additional rules. These additional rules are a very interesting section to have. If a player has no cards in their hand, they must draw 2 cards from the deck on their turn. So it's like, oh, if you've done all your things, get more things to do, which I think is very, very fascinating. And then if a player has more than 7 cards in their hand, they must discard down to 7 cards at the end of their turn. Sort of like a max hand size. And that's what it came up with in terms of it having a custom card game. And reading through it, like, it makes a lot of coherent sense. But it doesn't do too much to really lean into So how do we play this game? For example, like, it didn't come up with, like, what do these action cards look like? It merely gave examples of action cards. So it's like, are these additional things like put in? Why are we using a standard deck of playing cards if we're also going to need these special action cards that do additional special things? So in terms of its own design, in terms of what the AI came up with, it's a really cool sort of like framework idea, but it's not really fully complete. And that is a very interesting thing that I wanted to bring up about that. The main reason that I wanted to bring that up is that by doing some refinement in terms of doing some like manipulation to it, in terms of like going through the initial inspiration for it, we could then come up with our own sort of card game idea to play with a 52 standard deck of playing cards. So here's sort of my revisions with most of the things put in bold. I decided that since we're going to have these 4 things that are important to collect, why not use those face cards that we removed from the 52 card playing deck? So we can have the standard deck and we remove the Jack, Queen, King, and the Ace. So you have to remove the Ace this time too. And just have that be, if you start with all 4 face up, you win the game, because that counts as leaving the island. I have down here a clarification that the Jack is going to represent the food, Queen is going to represent the water, King is going to represent a map, and Aces are going to represent a raft. Because the compass was never referenced again, I'm like, let's just not worry about the compass. So now we have our shuffled deck on one side, and then a shuffled deck of our 4 resources. So we're going to, once again, start with 7 cards each player, but we're not going to start with any resources, since that's our goal to gather them. And now, what I wanted to specify, because it implied that you could do all of them, is that I wanted to make it much more faster paced in your actions. So you're only going to do one of the following actions on your turn. Draw a card from the action deck, which would be numbers of 2 through 10. Play a card from your hand to the table, which would be setting one of your resources face up. Or use a special ability of a card in your hand. That would be activating one of your action cards, coming from the numbers 2 through 10. So we still have the 2 card types, our resources and our action cards, but now they're more defined by being all of the royals or face cards, and then everything else. So we still need the same thing from the resource cards, our Jack through Ace. But now with our action cards, we're going to need to sort of define them a bit more. So our action cards are going to be our 2 through 10, but we're going to do it by suit. So to steal a resource, that would be playing a club from your hand into the discard pile. So that would allow you to steal a resource. You could then trade a resource by playing the heart from your hand. I thought that was very thematic, because, you know, heart, friendship, trading. I thought that would be very thematic. Then discarding a resource would be done by playing the spade, for example. So now we actually have an idea for how these games would play out. You would have one separate stack in your hand of your royal cards, which would be the ones you need to play face up. Then you have a separate stack of your action cards. On your turn, you either draw an action card, you either play an action card, or you put one of your royal cards face up onto the table, being like, I'm starting to establish my win. Notably, because you only start with 7 action cards, you have to use your action cards to get into your resources, which currently here is not actually outlined on any way to do it. You'll also notice that there's nothing for the diamonds to do. But then I went through the winning and losing. If you have all of them face up at the start of your turn, you're going to win the game. I personally would update that if there's the deck empties, you would probably shuffle in the discard pile and start redrawing from it. There's no current interaction with the discard, so it's not really a problem. And it would allow the game to reach a more satisfying conclusion. There might be an issue of like time, which is why you'd want to just end in a draw, but that was something that I was coming up with. Then there's a section of additional rules, which, if a player has no action cards in their hand, I specified, as opposed to just being no cards, because now I have your resources being going into your hand. And then I had to add this whole section right here of additional rules in terms of this now activity into it, because I want to have a bit of this like play and counterplay. So now we're playing these suits out of our hand, and I'm going to borrow from the ordering of suits, of suit order, in terms of it going clubs, diamond, hearts, spades, to allow you to counter actions that people do. So, for example, up there we have, if someone tries to steal a card from you with a club, you can defend with a diamond card in your hand. So now you're like, oh, do I want to play cards or leave them for protection? So if someone tries to steal a card, one of your resources from your hand randomly, you can play a diamond of equal or greater value to nullify the effect. And now you don't have that diamond in your hand anymore. I wanted to give diamonds an action, and I want to introduce the way for you to actually start getting resources back out of the resource deck. So now draw a diamond. You're going to play a diamond, target someone, say, I'm going to be drawing a resource. Do you have a heart to negate this? If they say no, you play your diamond, draw one of the resources, and then it cycles. If someone's trying to heart trade, you can defend with a spade to negate, and then you choose which two you're going to swap. As opposed to if someone plays the heart trade, they choose which two they're swapping. And then for the spade discard, defend with a club, and it just fully negates that discard action, so you don't cycle out the resources. But with these additions to it, I think through the inspiration of what like the OpenAI came up with, this could be like a fun game to play with your 52 card deck of playing cards. Like, you're always trying to have other things to do if you're not trying to play like poker, if you're not trying to play one of these other like classic card game variations. Inspiration from an OpenAI, just bada bing bada boom, do some specifications to it, and you have a fun little game that you can now play with people. And that is wild. That is wild to think about. In terms of all those coherent things that I was picking up and trying to poke at in terms of where it didn't have coherence, where it did have coherence, those are all things that could be done with, better AI, more training as we learn things more in the future. But for where it is right now, it's just a fascinating thing to think about. I'm not trying to say like, oh, the next big card game is going to be designed out of an AI. I'm not going to say like it's going to be taking over the game design space, because there's very clearly still a part where the person needs to come in terms of specifying the rules and making them more, make them just make more sense. But the idea of what you can do with the AI expands even beyond, and I think it's important to think about this, especially as we use it as a tool for moving to the future. I basically came up with a brand new 52 card game to come up with the assistance of ChatGPT from OpenAI. And otherwise I would have had to have, been like, what am I trying to do? What's the goal? How am I trying to play with people? And this allows for like the testing phase to come so much sooner of, hey guys, here's an idea. Let's test it. Let's see if it's good. If it's good, we can move forward with it. And if it's not good, then we're just done and we don't have to worry about it. So that is where I think this AI has a bit of like a useful tool to it, but it's really is just like an open sphere and open things happening, and a very, very important thing to think about and consider as part of the future here. The next things that I've done is that, just a little disclaimer there of being like, hey, cool if I use this in a video, and they already have all that stuff. So, hey, citing OpenAI, ChatGPT, putting it all here. And then it was like, what if I did want it to come up with a trading card game? Like, I am trying to start like, a small like company idea. I'm trying to do a little startup for a trading card game. Come up with an idea based off of medieval history. And it does something that seems very reasonable. Objective, make your opponent's life points 0. Classic idea of these 1v1 card games. Number of players, 2 players. Another classic idea. You have a deck full of heroes, weapons, armors, spells, and other elements of medieval history and folklore, and you have a life point counter. Like, this is all stuff that makes sense. Like, this is like the no-brainer kind of stuff as well, but it's good that's including these elements when it comes up with this. Shuffle one have a starting hand size of 7. Each player starts with 20 life points. 7 card in the hand size, 20 life points. I wonder where those elements could have come from. Go around clockwise around the table, and then on your turn, you can play a hero card from your hand, equip it with a weapon, armor, or spell card. You can attack one of your opponent's heroes with your own, and use special ability of a card in your hand. Again, it doesn't specify, do you do all of these? Do you do one of these? Do you do 2 of these? How many times can you do each of these? So all of that sort of stuff does need to be fleshed out a lot more, and that's where a human game designer can come in. And then it also gives a description of what the card types would be. Hero cards, your very classic minion, creature, unit sort of thing with attack and health, and you can buff it up and it has abilities. Weapons, armors, and spell cards are your very classic, like, other card that can just do other stuff. And then winning and losing. If you put them to 0 life points, they lose the game. And then here is where I really think the kicker comes in. Because, like, all of that stuff beforehand, you could be like, oh, that's just classic trading card game stuff. Under this additional rules section, you have players can have a maximum of 3 heroes in play at any given time, and that each players can have a maximum of 3 weapon, armor, and spell cards attached to each hero. Is that 3 total? Is that 3 weapons, 3 armor, and 3 spells? So 9 cards attached to each hero? I don't know. But here, it actually gave some additional insight of, here are the things for the rules. Keep this in mind. And honestly, like, if you were trying to be in a company and start working on it, you could take this idea, iterate upon it, and then try to turn it into a game. Of course, where the big question then comes in terms of, if I wanted to sell this is the question of, well, how much would I have to iterate on this in terms of making it my own actual design? Like, there are no cards here, so if I printed all of the cards, those would be all of, my idea or my company's designs. This doesn't specify how many actions, is there an energy or resource system, like all of those things you would still develop and like come up with. But any of like these rules that are taken at face value would have come from OpenAI's ChatGPT bot instead of being something they come up with themselves. So it's like where does it become something that like you're allowed to sell, or you're allowed to say like, hey, I came up with this with some help, but at what point are you then like, I'm gonna copyright this, try to sell it, try to make it a marketable product? So these I think are the really big questions to be asking. And for any of you guys out there, let me know. Put your voice in the comments. I want to hear a discussion about this because this is a very cool idea, very open space, a lot of possibilities and options here, especially if you guys give it a shot. And do you come up with an interesting card game? Do you come up with a card game that you think could be cool? Could you come up with a board game that you think is cool? And how does that make you feel? What are your thoughts about it? And what do you think about the future of this sort of, integration of technology, maybe giving some brevity to, testing and resources, maybe you need to add more verification that you came up with it on your own. Who knows? Whatever thoughts you guys come up with, let me know in the comments down below. So again, thank you guys so much for watching. This has been a really interesting topic on my mind, and I've really wanted to do a video about this for a little while. So let me know your thoughts. And as always, I wish you all absolutely wonderful, and please take care.